welcome to the show. I'm James, and that's Katie, I think. And this is the Circles and Squares podcast, episode 42. Kate, welcome to the show, or should I say Monokuma, welcome to the show.
Good morning, everyone. It's another beautiful day.
What an entrance. Can that be topped? I'm not sure that'll ever be topped. What a costume, Kate. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very proud of it. I'm very, very warm in here. But for those of you who are not doing the YouTube formula, I have a very exciting Monokuma Halloween costume this year. Yeah.
And for those of you watching, not watching, I've also completely let the show down and not dressed up at all. So
that's okay.
We balance out.
That's okay. I didn't
warn
you.
One good costume and one.
That's okay. I didn't warn you I would be doing this. This was partially a surprise for your pleasure as much as mine.
Well, I appreciate it because that thing is blowing me away, and I wish that I had like a Mono Me one to sit here and match you with.
Oh my god!
It would have just been fantastic.
Mono Me. That's like the worst but ultimate couples costume of all time, to be Monokuma and Mono Me.
Yeah, it is. Oh man. Okay, Kate. Well, it's the Halloween episode of the show, so we've got some scary stuff to talk about. But before we do, I just have a little bit of housekeeping to go over. First of all, thank you to one of our good friends and listeners of the show, Rob, for these fantastic PlayStation mugs. He hit us up with these the other day, and let me tell you, Rob, this makes the coffee taste a lot better. So thank you very much. You're making the show just that little bit better by giving us a delicious vessel for this delicious coffee. So thank you. And the second thing I wanted to mention just was that we do have our episodes of both of our new shows live. The first episode of the Circles and Squares News Report went live on Monday earlier in the week, where we talked about the Uncharted trailer, the Last of Us set photos. So please check that episode out on our channel there. And then also Circles and Squares Extra went live with our first episode of our off-topic show, where we talked all about Marvel's What If and what we thought of the first season, all that good stuff. So check those out as well. But for now, Kate, we've got a two-part show. We're talking about the games we've been playing over the past couple of weeks. And then for the second part of the show, we're going to talk about our favorite scary video games and what we like about horror games in general. So look forward to that later. Of course, we'll be ending the show with a listener mail question as well. But before we get to any of that, Kate, let's talk about what we've been playing the last couple of weeks. And you have something that I'm very interested in hearing about, Darkest Dungeon 2.
Yeah, so this is really exciting. It came to early access this past Tuesday, and so I picked it up on Epic. This is something I was really anticipating because I don't know if I've talked about it much on the show because it's been a while since I played, but I was really love and hate on the original Darkest Dungeon. I think the concept of it, the atmosphere, the art, there were so many things about the game that were an absolute 10 out of 10 for me, and I just was so in love with the idea of the game. But it was just such an oppressive kind of grindy slog to play sometimes that I don't always know if I was necessarily having fun playing it. And I think I liked it more in concept than I did totally in execution.
Yeah, that's exactly the experience I had too. I played it. I think I actually talked about it on the show on one of our episodes. But anyway, yeah, it's just one of those, the concept is so fun, the turn-based combat, that's all good, the atmosphere, cool idea, but it was just really dense and not hand-holdy, but not that you want it to be easy, but I felt like there was a lot of information the game didn't really tell you. Lots of stats and all that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping that they made it, easier to get into, while still keeping it that deep level of, deep mechanics under the hood, I guess I should say.
Yeah,
the game.
Absolutely. And that's one of the first things I've noticed about this is it seems a lot more user friendly, which is a funny term to use because there's nothing friendly about Darkest Dungeon. It's still an absolutely horrific, oppressive atmosphere. It's still the Lovecraftian dungeon crawler that's all about exploring the idea of how stressful something like this would be and the amount of PTSD your characters would accumulate, going toe to toe with these abominations. But it feels a lot easier to get into as a player. It's still got a lot of complicated systems going on, and I think especially if you haven't played the first one, it would be a little overwhelming to start out with. But I don't think I need 7 spreadsheets open while I'm playing this time, so that's a good sign.
7 spreadsheets, 2 wiki articles, and walkthrough of your someone who's beaten the game before.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's like. So yeah, they've kind of kept the overall tone of the game. It's still very much about, making the best decision out of a slew of horrible options, and it's still all about the psychological aspect of what dungeon crawling would do to some mercenaries or a group of characters. But it is really kind of, they've approached it quite differently. So I think the one thing that's kind of still seems very familiar from the first game is the combat. And so if you haven't played the first game, it's this really beautiful take on a turn-based combat system where you always go in with a party of 4 characters and all various different classes that have different abilities. And what's unique about this is that they stand in a positioning line. So from position 1 to 4, the back of your party all the way up to the front. And based on where a character is in that positioning system, they have different options of how they approach combat. So for example, you might have a character that has a melee attack, but they have to be in the front of the party in one of those first 2 positions to be able to use it. Whereas if they're in the back 2 positions, they may have a ranged attack that's then available to them instead. And so building out your party is something you need to consider where each person's going to stand in that line. And you also have access to various things that might move you throughout a match. So you might have something where you want to start out in the back and then, move forward as combat progresses. So there's a lot of really deep strategical elements just based around how that works, partially in battle and partially also outside of battle while you're constructing your team. And I really like that because that mechanic, to me, it keeps every battle feeling unique. I never feel like I go into it with the exact same strategy or I just kind of spam the same moves every round. Like, of course, like certain characters excel at certain things, so there is that similarity that falls over, but it always feels fresh. And I never feel like I can go into a match and like just kind of be like zoned out and doing like thinking about something else, which I find tends to happen in a lot of turn-based combat games. And so
yeah, this one's definitely got like a layer of extra. You don't often have to worry about positioning of your characters in like turn-based RPGs. That's usually a thing for like tactical games like XCOM or Final Fantasy Tactics or something. It's not like a traditional battle system thing. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I really like too how certain characters, like, you kind of always want to be at the front. Like we have a tank unit as one of the 4 starting classes, and like you don't want everyone to put your tank in the back. But there's certain units that you really can kind of mix and match depending on what you want them to excel at, given what kind of role your team is missing. And so I think it's really elegant. So that's pretty much the same. I think they've simplified a little bit in terms of just how clear a lot of the information is and just how some of the status conditions work, which I'm personally a big fan of because I don't want to have to be doing complex math while I'm playing a video game. So I'm a fan of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other big thing that kind of plays into battle, although this is a mechanic that is very integral outside of battle as well, is how the stress works. And so that's kind of like Darkest Dungeon's most defining mechanic is the stress meter. So a lot of the time in battle, like certain enemies will not even use damaging attacks, they'll just use attacks that stress you out. And in the original game, you had a meter that went up to...
That's such a funny sentence.
It kind of is,
You
right?
just like were to take that out of context, like that was... Sorry.
This is the horror episode after all. Like, what if horror games want to do more than stress you out? But yeah, so it's almost a more vital resource to keep track of than your health even, is the stress. And in the original game, you had a meter that sort of went up to 100, and it didn't really feel like there were a lot of like thresholds along the way. It was just kind of like, are you at 100 or above and like you're fucking stressed, or are you under 100 and you're doing okay? Whereas this one, they've changed it to be a much smaller scale, and so each point matters more, which I think is better for just kind of keeping
it
it
much more.
Yeah, you're just on your toes, and it's just more of a resource you're managing throughout the whole campaign, as opposed to like, well, I'm halfway through and now I'm stressed, so I should really be worrying about this.
Yeah, or being like, well, I'm at the start of the run, like I can take like a few points of stress and not really have any consequence and get these benefits because I don't have to worry about that yet.
Yeah, exactly. And the game is all about risk-reward consequences. So they've kind of changed a lot of the other functions of the game. Gone is the hamlet. You no longer return to like a town in between missions. The premise is now that you're sort of scaling this mountain, so you're constantly on the move. There's no like upgrading your hub area. That doesn't exist. So that feels streamlined as well, and it also feels like more of a clear roguelike framework, which I personally like. I feel like the first game could be a little bit grindy sometimes because it wasn't always clear how you were progressing. You'd go on a mission and like your characters would end up like worse for wear most of the time when they came back, and you just get a little bit of like different currencies you'd use, and like, okay, well, like, you know, like my tavern is slightly better now, and like, you know, I can hold one more item at the store, and so like there was progression for sure, but it wasn't quite as tangible. Whereas now it feels really clear, like each character is upgrading skills as you go along with the currency. You have like an actual like I guess it's like tied to your account, a level, and every level you go up, you get unlocks to different things, whether that's different class types or different like items that you're able to equip to your characters, or like consumables. So it's very clear, the progression, which feels nice because oftentimes the runs end in absolute tragedy. So it's good to feel
most
most
of the time.
Well, yeah, most of the time. But it's good to feel like you accomplished something on that run regardless, because everything else has kind of gone up. So again, like it's up to interpretation. I personally like those things being a little more simplified, because to me, what I'm focusing on and kind of the draw for the game is being encouraged now through the relationship system and this kind of new statuses they've given it. So for me, what the biggest draw is for this kind of game is the character relations, how the character growth and how they change over time. So in the first game, I feel like you were constantly kind of switching units in and out, and there wasn't a lot of attachment to each individual character. It was kind of more like you could just buy and hire units whenever you wanted, and if they got a bad condition, then
it's
you
like
just
the XCOM system.
Exactly, and they got a bad condition, you just sort of throw them out and buy someone new, because that was cheaper than, you know, taking them to the sanitarium and getting them all like, you know, sorted out. Like therapists are very expensive in the Darkest Dungeon universe, and we just can't afford it, so you just hire someone else.
It's like the Monty Python thing, like bring out your dead.
Exactly. Exactly. But like Bring Out Your Dead, now the only way you can actually get rid of a unit is if they die. There's no longer a way to like dismiss them. They're with you until the end. And you also cannot have multiple of the same type of unit. So that means if you have the Plague Doctor unit, which is the healer that you start out with, and, you know, he gets a little stressed and has some issues on the first run, you're stuck with him. You're invested in this character. You have to put your points into, you know, making him feel better, because otherwise you don't have a Plague Doctor. And I personally really like that, because I think a lot of the mechanics in this game and the beauty of it is exploring that, like, you know, what happened to them and all these negative aspects and the PTSD and the struggles that they go through. Because then when you have a moment where they really like shine and they overcome that, it's meaningful. And you can't have it both ways. And so the relationship status, I think, along with how you recruit units, really like emphasizes this as a core part of the game. And what happens to the relationships now is, as your party is journeying, they start to build either friendship or hatred between the rest of the characters. Ideally friendship, and if you can build that up, they start to help each other out during battle. They might kind of heal each other on opposing turns, or try to like give various buffs. And then vice versa, if they hate each other, they might start to try to like, you know, do really horrible petty things like, I'm not going to heal that person, I hate him, and like, you know,
I'm taking your potion.
Exactly. So there's some deceit goes on, and there's various ways that you can kind of control this in terms of like, you know, using items to help them bond, or you'll be making story decisions, and each character will kind of give how they want to approach the situation, and you kind of have to choose not only what you want to do as a player, like, you know, certain outcomes are better for you, like you might want to go this place that has the chest because I really want some more loot, or maybe I want to go down the safer route because I don't want to fight, I feel like I'm dying. But each character is going to weigh in and be like, well, I want to go this way. And so that's also something you need to take into consideration. They kind of feel like they actually have a personality that you have to play around.
Right, and it's important to keep them somewhat satisfied too, because you're going to rely on them to keep yourself alive.
Exactly. And so I really like this new role playing element to the game. I know it's not for everyone. I know some people really like the more like numbers heavy kind of like optimization sort of aspect of the game, and that's still there in one, but I think this is kind of more the vision of how they wanted one to be approached. It'll be a little bit more character driven, and so I personally am all for it. I think it's fantastic. And I'll leave you with a little story of how my first official run went. And so I named my group the four of us after me and three friends, because obviously, what better way to
You have to. You have to.
you have to do the XCOM approach. And so one of my characters right off the bat, he was like the tall, dark, mysterious dude. And he had like a negative personality trait where he's just like really antisocial. So he immediately was like, no, I don't want to hang out with you guys. And then we had another guy, our doctor, our plague doctor. He was like, he had a really weird bloodlust, and everything he wanted to do was just like go fight. And so he was like, he really wanted to join Fight Club. And then my character and our tank, we played like darts at the start before we left out of the tavern. And so we were immediately best friends. So we're on our way. Like, everyone's doing pretty well. No one's too stressed. We're all healthy. Me and the tank are having a good time. The tank did really well in a battle, like got a crit and killed someone. And that impressed wannabe Fight Club doctor. So now he was on board in the friendship. Everything's going well. Our highwayman, the antisocial one, realized, but it might be nice to cultivate a relationship. I'm kind of isolating myself here. So he took a first step, and he told my character that, well, at least you don't snore. So, for some people
that's so passive aggressive.
It really is. But, for some people that's something. And I would consider the first, like, maybe 20 minutes, like, just an absolute, like, we were the chosen ones. We were on our way, like, flying the eagles to Mordor. Everything was amazing. And then we got ambushed by some dudes in the woods, and our tank died. He got a couple unlucky crits in a row, and he just fell, and the party never recovered. We spent the rest of the journey exceptionally stressed. I had a meltdown on the road because I was hungry, which, like, to be fair, I might do in real life. But we managed to scrape by. We had a decent amount of healing, so we made it to the final fight on the map. It was against these pretty devious cultists. And we felt a little outmatched, especially a man down. So during the fight, all three of us had individual meltdowns. We all officially declared how much we hated each other, and gained official tumultuous friendship status. And then we all died.
Oh, rip.
Yep. And so
oh man,
that's been my experience with Darkest Dungeon 2 right now. And I can tell you, based off of that, I absolutely love the direction of this game, and I cannot wait to play some more.
I'm glad to hear it. It sounds like a good time. It sounds like they really improved on some of the flaws of the first one. That's cool. I hope you're gonna get the full release then, obviously, and report back.
Yeah. So I think with buying the early access, I've bought the game. I just now have access. But I will say, just to mention as well too, that it is an early access. So everything I've said, there's obviously a lot of balancing things that need to get done. The systems aren't perfect yet, so I didn't really want to go into that detail because that's to be expected with the state of the game right now. So I just kind of wanted to talk about them more broadly in terms of the direction of the game, and it'll get refined and ironed out as it goes. So yeah, it is an early access. It's only a small portion of the game. Not everything's available, and the things that are there are subject to be improved on or tweaked a bit. So I know a lot of people, are talking about online about numbers and, what's too strong, what's too weak. And that's definitely like, something that,
well, that's part of the reason they're doing the beta, right? It's to get people's impressions of this stuff so that they can fix it and optimize it for that audience.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, just looking at broadly at the game, I have a lot of high expectations going forward.
Glad to hear it. That sounds like a good time. I'd like to try that eventually too. We'll see. Kate, I want to tell you about my update on Metroid Dread, because I know I talked about this on the show last time. But I thought that this was, especially for the Halloween episode, an important one to come back and revisit, because I did manage to finally beat the game last night. I clocked in at just under 8.5 hours, which I think is a little longer than average. But I mean, I just took my time a little bit, explored around. I'm not like the best player, but I made it through. And overall, I just want to continue and say, like, the same sentiment I really had last time, which is that I really love this game. I think it's easily, for me at least, a top Switch game that Nintendo's released the last, I don't know, few years. And I think that it wouldn't be crazy to see this on Game of the Year list at the end of the year. I mean, I don't know if it's gonna win. We were talking about that a bit last time about how it's kind of one of those years where there's not like one thing jumping out super strongly, but this definitely could be on the list, I think. And I mean, it was just a great time. I think I want to talk a little bit more just about a couple things, which is firstly, like a lot of people talk about the difficulty with this game, and I've seen a lot of varying opinions ranging from like, it's just kind of a standard Metroidvania type thing to like, don't buy this game, it's too hard. And it's interesting because as you're like the Souls person, and Souls get a lot of conversation generated around this type of thing. And I don't know, like there's a lot of intersections, and I guess it's like not entirely one-to-one comparable, but a lot of the premises are the same, I guess, regarding like having to run back and dying and overcoming challenges and whatnot. So I think this game has a good mix of that. Like it's really well checkpointed. I think the save points are really well. They obviously know where the points are going to be in the game where you're probably going to die a lot, so you're always kind of right back there as much as you can be. And to me, that worked out just fine. I think, I mean, I could see definitely getting stuck at some of these points to where you would want to put the game down, but I guess luckily for me, maybe that just didn't happen. But I had a good time overcoming those challenges, even though they weren't like I never had like a really frustrating like want to throw the controller down type of moment with this game, which is nice. But that, I mean, I definitely had some like, oh man, I have to fight that boss again and again to kind of learn. But it was a good experience. Speaking of the bosses, though, one of the things I did want to touch on was that I think that's maybe an area where the game did let me down slightly, and I want to qualify that because the game has a few different styles of boss and a few different types. Like they have some, I won't spoil any names, there's some returning Metroid kind of bosses that you would know if you're a fan of the series, and those are all really cool because they're like bespoke encounters with that one boss who's got their moveset and everything. But then there's some other kind of boss encounters where you fight these they're just called there's a certain type of warrior, I won't spoil it, but they're kind of they're those cookie cutter kind of fights where once you fought one, you've kind of fought all of them, with the exception of they might have like one or two different moves here and there. And that happens enough. I've done this one too many times, maybe by the end. And so I
They've
found
got
those fights in particular
the
to be
God
a
of
bit
War
repetitive.
the God of War trolls issue.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like that. I mean, the fights were fun. It's not like it's not, fun to pull it off and see what skill you earn for beating it. But I definitely fought maybe a few more of those than I would have wanted. But I mean, yeah, by the end of the game though, like you're just such a powerhouse. And aside from those bosses, you're just, for those that have played Metroid on any level and kind of, got those final end game type of abilities, like you're just a flying ball of death going around the screen. Like it's so easy to go and explore for the most part, and fill out that map if you want to, because you're really invincible as long as you found enough kind of health pickups and everything. But you're gonna be good. And I don't know if I'm going to plan to go back and 100% and find all the different collectibles and everything. There's a hard mode that unlocks too when you beat the game, and so I would imagine I'll probably go back and try that at some point. Who knows if I'll make it all the way through though, because like I said, this game is definitely not easy. Although I wouldn't say it's like backbreaking either, but it's just cool that especially for a game that's not the lengthiest experience for a full price game, that they seem to have at least that extra mode put in there. There's obviously a lot of speed running stuff for people that are interested in that. I've seen some people getting to like 3 hours and not to beat the game, and like, holy shit, like that is intense. I couldn't imagine how well you must have to execute. But all in all, like I think it's a great experience, especially for someone that would be new to the series. I think you might have a bit of trouble at the start, just kind of learning the language, but the game just directs you so well, and I think that's something that I really appreciate. Like another Metroidvania that I've been playing so many times on the show, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, is like I've kind of been comparing them along the way in like Super Metroid as well. And I find that this game, for whatever reason, it just really checkpoints you super, super well of where you're supposed to go next in terms of like the next main objective. And there are options to go off and explore and like look around and go back to previous areas with the new abilities and see what you find. But the game always, or I feel for the majority of the time, like if you open up your map and just based on the context of what's going on, you're kind of always pointed to the next objective really well. And because the map is so big and it can be intimidating, I think that that's a really good thing, because I think a lot of people will turn this type of thing off when they're like, oh, I don't know where the hell I'm going. Like, this map is a maze. I've died to this boss a couple times and I'm just going to give
Yeah.
up. And
Either
so I think it
either
does a good job of shielding you from that.
yeah, and the other issue with that kind of thing too is that if you don't really know where you need to go, it's possible that you start to look it up and then you're kind of following a guide.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in those kind of games like that are so exploration focused, you don't want people to be not experiencing that for themselves, right? Like you want to be exploring, you want to have that like aha moment when you find out somewhere you could go, or you realize that like, oh, hang on, I can break that wall now. And those are moments in Metroidvanias that I think what kind of makes the genre special. And so if you're just following a guide because you're frustrated, you don't know where to go, that sort of, you know, like ruins the experience a little bit for you. But at the same time, if you can't figure out where you need to go without a guide, that's also an issue. So you want to find that like happy medium where you never really feel stuck, but you always feel like you figured it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's pretty much what this game, I feel hits the balance really well. So I'm interested now to go back and kind of look through other people's experience and listen to like spoiler podcasts and spoiler content on this game, because I feel like there's a kind of a wide range of opinions on the nitty gritties of this game, despite like overall it being really well liked. Man, the ending is really cool, by the way, like story wise for Metroid, and just kind of the visuals of it and that final little sequence, like it is very cool. So yeah, I'm really impressed, and I just hope this leads to more Metroid from Nintendo now, especially Mercury Steam. I think knocked it out of the park with this game, and so I would love to see them take kind of the bones of this and continue on with like maybe another couple 2D Metroids on the Switch. Come on, let's hope for it, because this was great.
Well, you need something to tie you over for Prime 4 as well, because
right, yeah.
who knows when that's coming out.
Yeah. Man, but this just has me excited for that. I'm really hoping now that Metroid Prime trilogy ends up being real, because I would love to go back and do those. So maybe I'll go back and play more of the 2D Metroids I've missed, because I've not played them all. So maybe this has lit that bit of a fire, but we will see. Yeah, that's Metroid though. Play it for sure.
I will. Lend it to me.
I will. I'll give it to you very shortly. Yeah, I've also been playing, Kate. This is not a scary game, although I guess they do kind of wear costumes. I've been playing NHL 21, which is not really a Halloween game.
That is a costume you could wear for Halloween. So
You could.
You could.
But for them, it's a uniform, and so this is, of course, the hockey game, which comes out from EA Sports every week. Or
every week.
Jeez.
Every week. Sometimes it feels that way.
It feels that way for these sports games sometimes, yeah. But this is NHL 21. We don't talk about a lot of sports stuff on the show. In fact, when we do, it's usually under the context of like, this was free on PS Plus, and I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yes, occasionally we are forced to play tennis, and we begrudgingly do so.
Exactly, but I am a big NHL fan, as people probably know. And I play the NHL games every year to varying degrees. Sometimes I get really into them, obsessed for a while. Sometimes I play more than others, but I've been playing this one for the last couple weeks and really having a good time. I honestly think this is one of the better ones they've done in a while. And I think that the sports games really get bagged on for like, it's the same thing every year. And I'm one of those people that bags on them for exactly that, because I think they are mostly the same thing every year, and it's not really worth like, 90% of the mechanics being the same and whatnot. But I mean, this game definitely has some of that as well, but I think there's a lot of just really positive changes that I've enjoyed, and it's really sucked me in. Specifically, there's this thing called the Hockey Ultimate Team mode, which is something I've never really played before, and so I don't know exactly how different it is compared to other years, but this is the mode which does have the microtransactions, and you're buying like the booster packs of cards and whatnot, and collecting those. I haven't spent $1, don't worry, but yeah, you can like earn the in-game currency and do the challenges.
I thought this is how we were steering back to Halloween.
No. Yeah. But it's just been really fun to like go through and collect the packs and like do the challenges and whatnot that you earn from them. There's like so many different ways to do this stuff. So you're basically like building your roster of players from the cards you open out of these collectible packs. But then you take your team, do challenges. So you'll be playing like different teams from all around. It's not just NHL teams. It's also from like all over globally, wherever hockey's played. They have, in professional sense, they have teams from all over the place, and you're playing different rosters, and there's different challenges you've got to complete along the same way. Which is what I really appreciate a lot, because I think a lot of the time, like, I don't play these games online because people are just so damn good at it, and also my internet sucks. and I'm just way too laggy to get to play. But playing against the computer can be really frustrating because I feel like the difficulties either like I steamroll them or I have like no chance and I can never do anything and I just lose instantly. And so like getting these challenges to do makes it more fun. It'll be like win the game, but you can't take any penalties and you have to score 2 goals or something like that, or
Okay.
hit 10 people before the end of the game. And they're short form, like they make the games like 1 or 2 minutes long each. You're trying to complete these tasks as well as win at the same time, and it just adds that little level of like arcadey, trying to go out of your way to do things you wouldn't normally do, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is a fun incentive to make it a bit more replayable, less repetitive. And so I, I think that's what's kind of kept me coming back to it. And they also have another thing which is along the same lines, but they have like this 3-on-3 mode in there as well, where you don't really use the cards that you have that you've collected, but you do something like in the TCGs they do like booster drafts and stuff
Yep.
where you'll
Mm-hmm.
go and like everyone opens up and takes a card. They kind of have something like that for this 3-on-3 mode as well, where it'll be like a week long event, and however many points you can accumulate over that week, you'll like earn a certain reward. But you don't use your team. You do essentially what's like a booster draft, and you draft like a goalie, a defenseman, and like a couple forwards out of these packs. And these players come up. They have like historical players, they have current players, and you're kind of one by one picking your team. Which for this week you get to use them, and then they're gone next week, and you just do it again. But the 3-on-3 mode they have for this is so specifically like really really arcadey. There's no rules. They have like the arenas you're playing in are like sometimes they're outside or they're decorated differently, or there's like funny announcers or these
Mm-hmm.
graphics that would not be used to show like the score, and they're kind of like that what's that lo-fi like synth kind of vibe, like
Okay.
those
Yep. I
purples
can
and
picture
neon
it.
colors and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't seem like something you would see in the presentation of like a
No.
normal game setting.
And that sounds like the exact opposite of that golf game that you were talking about last episode, where you said it was like so sterile and so heartless. And it was just the ultimate, like, we made a sports game and like, if you like golf, you'll play it, but it is no like soul otherwise. So this sounds like the opposite, where like there is some kind of, there's like an artistic direction in addition to it being a sports game.
Yeah, there totally is, and like especially I think it's this 3-on-3 mode with like that's made me really had that feeling, like because like hockey has so many rules to it, and if you have to understand those to play it. But the 3-on-3 mode, like you could pick this up with anybody. You could like do anything you want. There's no penalties at all. Like it just encourages you to create as much mayhem as you can. And there's
Right.
score multipliers where you could score a goal and it's worth 100 points, but if you pass to someone, then he does a spinorama and then shoots between his legs. Those like stack together as multipliers, and you
Is
earn
that
extra
is that a
points. So you're
rule?
almost trying to like chain
Is that a rule
these
you're not
these
normally
different
allowed to
moves
spin
together.
around in hockey? You can do
No,
whatever
it
you
is,
want.
but
You can spin around, you can kill a man, just put the puck in the net, who
yeah,
cares?
exactly. It's just a good time though. Like I've had a really good time just fooling around with all these different things, and somewhat like as much as I hate the microtransaction type of thing, and like I would never want to pay for these digital trading cards that when NHL 23 comes out or 22 comes out next year, they're just gone and forever deleted off my hard drive. Like it's as long as I'm earning the currency through the game and like doing these playing the modes that I'm just enjoying, then it is fun to like open those packs and get
Hmm.
players that I know, and add them to my squad, just like you would in like a Pokemon TCG or something when you get a sick Blastoise or something like that, which is cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I've really enjoyed how fast it loads on PS5. Also, like some of the simulation when you're doing like there's a management sim mode as well where you can run your team and sign players and upgrade your parking lot and your bathroom at your at
Oh,
your arena and
nice.
stuff like that.
That's worth
It's
five
kind of
real
cool, but
dollars for sure.
oh, exactly. But it's just that whole mode, like it used to be so painful to play sometimes, just because you'd sit there and it'd simulate like in the background for minutes, and you could go and play a game of chess in the background and then come back and see what had happened. But in this one, like on PS5, obviously it's so much faster. You can it does it almost instantaneously. Like it's just such a better experience in terms of like how the game runs as well. But I do have one negative, Kate, and it's something that we have not had happen on the show too many times. I have had my first really negative DualSense experience playing
Really?
NHL 21.
Ooh,
I have,
I
and
am shocked.
I'm a little shocked too, and I feel like this is the first. You know, back when like the DS was first coming out, and it was like, why do we have to put touch controls in games that don't need them?
Right.
And
Yeah.
kind of overused, and it's just like this is. I see what you were going for, but it's just too much. And I feel like this is what's happened with this game on the DualSense. It's just overdone. I mean, first of all, the vibration. They tried to go for something really cool, which is like when you're skating around, you the left and right handles of the controller are almost like the blades of your skate. So it's supposed to be like
Oh,
as your
okay.
player moves left, right, you're supposed to be able to feel like the skating motion in the controller. And you kind of do, but the problem is the controller's always facing like the same direction, right? You're always holding it oriented the same way,
Hmm.
but your player might be skating like from right to left or like down the ice or something. And so
Right.
it doesn't always line up with where they're going. And it just ends up feeling like your controller is kind of just randomly vibrating,
Hmm.
which is weird. And like if you're skating, upwards with one player, but then you switch to a different player and he's like going backwards on a different part of the ice, your controller is just kind of changes, and it's a little bit disorienting. I ended
Right.
up wanting to turn it off,
That sounds
actually.
distracting more so than
It
anything.
was. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also like the other thing too is that they use the speaker for some really cool ideas. They just it's just so loud. It's pretty like when you score a goal, for example, there'll be music played in the arena, but it comes out of the speaker, not on the TV. So your
Okay.
controller just starts
That's cool.
blaring this music, and sometimes like your coach starts yelling at you through the controller. He'll be like, "Hey, come for a line change," or like like shoot the puck or something. He'll like yell at you through the controller. And it's just kind of like, dude, shut up. I'm trying to just play my game. Okay. Just let me relax. This is not the real NHL. I just want to do what I want to do. So I ended up having to turn some of that stuff down and tweak it a little bit just because it was like, you know, I just don't overdo it like this, I feel is
Hmm.
the name of the
Yeah, that's a little bit
so that's unfortunate.
abrasive.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but I mean, easily fixed, right? Easily fixed. But I just thought I should shout that out because we always are talking the DualSense up so much. I think it's important to call it out when it's not used so perfectly,
Hmm.
also. But yeah, for those of you who are listening, if you're a hockey fan at all, NHL 21, I would say is a well spent investment if you're looking for getting back into a hockey game, especially if you haven't played for a couple of years. I think it's worth it. If you play every year and you're kind of like on the fence, not a huge fan, here and there, could probably miss it. But I mean, for me, huge fan, really enjoying it. Good game, and yeah, that's NHL 21. Kate, we have a second part of the show to move into, though, because it is Halloween. We wanted to celebrate and spend some time talking about our favorite scary video games or scary moments in games. Just maybe kind of horror games in general. I know you're definitely a little bit more experienced with them than me, Kate. So I don't know, maybe you have a place you want to start with this, but I don't know. What's your favorite scary game?
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing, and I almost kind of like maybe thought too much about it when we were deciding we talk about scary games today, because I think like it's almost there's like the horror game genre, and then there's games that and moments in games that I find scary. And there's definitely some successful horror games and some games that like I really like, but I honestly think that like some of the scariest moments in games have come from games that are not strictly horror games for me. And I think that's a lot to do with like how the context is framed, because
Mm-hmm.
for me, like what's really scary in a game is when I start to feel like helpless, or that like the rules have been changed on me, and that I no longer like feel confident or safe in what I'm going to do. And a lot of the time in a horror game, you don't have that sense of like you're powerful and there's always something lurking around the corner, but it isn't
Mm-hmm.
unexpected. That's exactly what you know you're getting yourself into. Whereas in other games that are not strictly horror games but have a horror section, or a section that surprises you with some horror elements, I find those tend to be scarier because you're caught off guard by them.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same thing as like, unless the atmosphere is done really well. Like I think
Hmm.
of a game like Amnesia. Like I know I'm going
Yeah.
into a scary experience, but like that game's just fucking scary. Like no
Yes.
matter what you're
Am-
expecting.
Amnesia was a
But you're totally
fantastic
right.
game. Amnesia was fantastic, and I think it did a lot for the horror genre, and it's kind of spawned my favorite type of horror game when I specifically sit down to play a horror game. And of course, when I say sit down to play a horror game, I mean with at least 2 friends, because I will never
with
play
the
one
lights
alone.
on.
Exactly. No, we turn the lights off. We are good about that. Turn the lights off, but no headphones, no on my own. You know, we're surrounded. We're
I couldn't
swapping the
imagine playing a horror
controller.
game
Oh, I don't know how
like
people do
headset
it.
on. I actually did that just for a little bit with Resident Evil 2 remake. Like I played a few
Uh-huh.
sessions with the headset. I was playing actually. Well, one of my friends was on the like watching me screen share or whatever, so I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't totally alone. But having the surround sound like that
Yeah.
adds such a level of creepiness and immersion to what you're doing. Hearing like zombies coming up behind you and all this kind of stuff, like it was very
It
intense.
is, and
I have so much respect.
I do not know how people go one step further and do the VR. Like that's just
Oh yeah.
outrageous to me. Like props on you if you can handle that. I think I'd be in an asylum if I had to. Like
It's
that's no
funny
good.
though. It's funny because I love horror movies. Like it's one of
Mm-hmm.
my horror is one of my favorite movie genres. But when it comes to games, I find it so much more unappealing almost. And I think for me, a big thing is always it's because you can't have any kind of break in a game. You can't look away for that split second or close your eyes or something because you are the protagonist. Like you're in the game. If you don't play it,
Mm-hmm.
you're just gonna die or have to restart and do it again anyways. So the fact that you actually have to experience every second of it and be in control and you're not just watching someone make stupid decisions on like a cheesy horror movie. You're actually trying not to make the stupid decisions and it's stressful and intense and they're pressure filled a lot of the time too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what draws me to them is I really like them socially. I think it's fun when you're passing the controller around and that one person who's playing is like tense and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to go around the corner." And you know that they're like having that stressful feeling, and the experience of like sharing that, so you're never like playing for too long and you're getting fatigued by it. And it's also like, I don't know, it's just kind of a fun thing. Like it's fun to see your friend get scared and you bug them about it and you're making fun of them, and then everybody's like shit talking the enemies because like that's how you deal with them and you make them less scary in your mind. So that to me is really what draws me to horror games. I really like them as a social thing. And it's funny you bring up Amnesia because that is the one horror game I actually played on my own, just because I was so interested in the game and I kind of got hooked
It's a hell
on.
of a one to pick to do by yourself.
Yeah, and I kind of got hooked on the story. So I don't think I ever played it when I was alone, but I played it on my own while I was with someone who was doing something else. So
Mhm.
I kind of double dipped a little bit. Maybe it's a little disingenuous to say I totally played it on my own, but it was just me playing the whole time. And that game was phenomenal. I love what it did with the idea of like, you have no options to deal with the monsters. You are completely at their mercy. You're skulking around, you are powerless. And just that like survival instinct, that's all you have, is really powerful. And
Mhm.
I love the genre it spawned from that. Probably the scariest game the scariest horror game I've ever played has got to be Outlast.
I've heard a lot of
Specifically,
stuff about that, yeah.
specifically the DLC, and it's another one of those amnesia type scenarios where you don't have any weapons. You're sneaking around, like you've got the infrared camera that you gotta like kind of look through, but also preserve the battery so you can't use it too much. And so that's another level of tension to the game, which I think is really clever. And it was genuinely terrifying. There's one point in the DLC where like you get caught by this like crazy guy in the asylum and he like chops.
Oh,
I
great.
think he like cuts your leg. I'm not exactly sure what he does to you, but he injures you somehow. He's trying to like mutilate you and you end up getting away, but you're injured. So now you cannot run. You can only limp very slowly, and you have to get out of this area where he sort of got you trapped. But
Mhm. Mhm.
you are incredibly slow now. So like normally in a horror game, like sometimes you can run away and you can outrun the monster and find somewhere to hide, and then there's that like, ooh, I'm so scared, like they're looking for you,
Yeah,
like they
yeah.
might look under the bed you're hiding under, like you're not totally safe, but you had an option. Whereas when you're hobbling around in that area, if that guy sees you, you're done for. You are not
Yeah, you can't
hobbling
get
your way to
away.
safety. So I think that I remember being absolutely terrifying. But at the same time, it was one of the first horror games I played. And so I feel like I've kind of become a little bit desensitized to them. They
There's
don't
definitely
scare
some
me.
overlap with some. Like you get used to this certain kind of like, oh, I'm running from this guy now. Where's something I can hide underneath type of deal.
Hmm.
Like you've done it more than once now. reminds me of my experience. Actually, you describing that very similar to one of my favorite horror games. It's definitely not like a super scary one, but it was Little Nightmares. Played it a
Mm-hmm.
couple years ago. Actually, me and Ash played it together, and the whole like Tim Burton kind of aesthetic to it, and it's creepy in that kind of animated cartoon way. But the whole thing about, like you said before, like being powerless, you don't have any weapons in that game. If you get caught by whatever is chasing you, you're going to be in trouble. And so it really is about like sneaking around, yeah, hiding under the bed, making sure the enemy's looking the other way. But there's some really grotesque looking creatures and situations you run into in that game, which is really off-putting. And just again, like being in that pressure situation and knowing you can't get caught, like it's terrifying in some spots. There's no doubt about it. And it's interesting though, because I would say one of the scariest games I've played recently, I haven't played a ton of horror recently, but I actually found Control to be pretty creepy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to juxtapose it because in Control you're far from powerless. Like you have quite a few weapons and abilities you get. Like you can fight, but even still, like the setting more so in that game was just so intense and psychologically mysterious. And they're connecting to this other worldly plane, and who's really being possessed, where is everyone at. Like it's just so cerebral the way they present the story in
Mm-hmm.
that game. And even though you're powerful, it's just like you're tense to see what kind of possessed essence will be around like the next major plot point and stuff like that. And it's just really compelling, but off-putting. And it's very like, ugh, makes you just feel kind of gross.
Yeah, you get some shivers in your skin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
genuinely though, genuinely.
definitely. And I think there's definitely certain games I have that, like, I've been playing a lot of Returnal recently, obviously. And Returnal it's definitely like an atmospheric and kind of Lovecraftian sort of like, like unsettling atmosphere going on. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily scary as you're playing, right? Like it's very
Hmm.
vibrant. A lot of the colors, like the monsters are more interesting than scary looking. They're amazing designs, but they're not intended to be super scary. And like the music is more like unsettling than it is really like scary, and there's not really jump scares and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But every now and again, you have that section where you walk by your house. Because spoiler, your house is on this alien planet. Never a good sign.
I think that was in a
Um,
trailer,
it is in the trailer.
I
Yeah,
think.
there is a
Yeah, yeah.
scene in the trailer where you go in your house. So yeah, it's typically it's locked. But every now and again, what usually I think it's due to some progression, your house is unlocked. And when you go in your house, you walk slowly, you can interact with objects, you don't have your gun with you. And it is genuinely terrifying when you're walking around your house because some crazy, like messed up, like psychological shit's happening to you. And you're in the middle of a run, you've been running and gunning, you're having a good time, it's really action focused. And then you walk by your house and then you see it's unlocked and you go like, oh shit, like I'm not ready for this.
Ooh.
And it's genuinely terrifying. But I think it also comes kind of back to what I'm saying, like expectations. Like when I sit down to play Returnal, I'm
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
expecting to go in the house. I'm expecting to, be playing the game, which is what you do for 98% of the time. But because it's those little moments that you don't have time to sit down for, or to like, assume that that's what you're going to end up doing, it's like, oh, it's so
Hmm.
disturbing.
Hmm. I think that's a really key aspect, like we were saying before, and I think games that do a really good job of that, like I even think of Metroid, like just playing that, like that game is not a horror game, but it's definitely got some scary parts to it. There's a few jump scares, like the SAX back in Metroid Fusion even was one of the scariest things, like one of the first scary moments in a game I'd ever experienced. So there's that kind of thing. I think BioShock's another good example of that,
Yes.
where
The splicers.
it's not a horror game, but I mean, coming out when you get in that first initial plane crash, you go in the water and
Mm-hmm.
then you initially enter Rapture. I remember just encountering that first enemy who's kind of yelling at you as you step out, and it's very
Yeah, and he's
intimidating.
like
Like
trying to
just
crack through the glass of the like
yeah,
elevator in. Yeah, it sets the
yeah, like
tone, and
that set a tone really well.
yeah,
Very scary.
that game genuinely, yeah. The big daddies like not so much, but just like the individual splicer enemies, especially the ones that like crawl on the ceiling, they were
Yeah, and even
oh
like the little girls and stuff, or the what are they called, little
yeah, the little
sisters? Like those
sisters.
those are terrifying too,
Yeah.
in a different way. And just like kind of the people that are clearly they're like malnourished and kind of fused with all that. What do they call it? Those energy things that give you
The
the powers,
Atom.
but it's just a little grotesque.
Yeah, and they're
And
in
there's that guy coming down the stairs in that one part, and with all the dummies around his house. Like, what the hell is that
yeah.
about?
And I think it's like yeah, all the NPCs you meet are really unhinged, like they're
Hmm.
unpredictable, like you don't feel like you feel like at any time they might just like stab you. Like you're never safe in that game.
Which several of them do try to do. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think another like franchise that I think we really need to, or at least I need to touch on just because I've played recently as well, is the Resident Evil series. And it's interesting because you've played some of the remakes, some of the older games, and I've played the two most recent ones. And so
I've only played 2 remakes, so
okay, so yeah,
for what it's worth, it's only the one game. But
you played 2, and I played 7 and 8, and so 7 was really scary. That was probably like the pinnacle of like when I was getting really into horror games, and 7 is just the whole premise of like the crazy like Southern family that
it's so off-putting.
You get caught up with.
I do want to play that game.
Yeah,
it's one of the ones high on my list for horror.
It's definitely really good. Like the story gets really goofy and silly, and like maybe I don't think the ending is quite as scary as the first half of the game, but the first half is genuinely terrifying, walking around in that house and like all like the weird monstrosities you're coming across.
I'm already getting goosebumps about it, I gotta be honest.
I genuinely think the scariest part of that game is kind of before the family started turning into monsters and you kind of got in the like boss battle shootout kind of thing. I think the scariest part of the game is at the very beginning when you get there and they're just like this creepy unhinged family, and I don't know if that's maybe just my preference or what, but I think
it's more tangible though for the real world. Like you could envision a scenario where you are actually in that situation.
Yeah,
whereas
exactly.
The more supernatural it kind of gets, maybe not.
Exactly, and then also like you kind of get a little bit more powerful as you go, right? Like Resident Evil, you get like a flamethrower at one point, right? And like like regardless of what kind of situation you're in, you just feel a little more safe when you're carrying a flamethrower.
True.
And then 8 in comparison was way more like action focused. Like there were times in 8 where it was kind of scary, and there was definitely like one sequence in particular I'll always remember, and I happened to be the one playing at the time. And you're kind of like walking around the village. You sort of between the main areas of the game, you go to the village and you can kind of like explore a little bit more each time. And so I was in this one house, and there was like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was a note and it was like, don't look out the window. And I was like, oh no, like, And so I was like, well, I have to look out the window. Like, of course I do. And I look and there's nothing there. I'm like, oh my God, like I thought for sure there'd be like a monster and he'd jump scare me. And then as I went to leave the house right after, that's when he jump scared me. And it was like the fake out. It was so good, and I just like always remember like you jump.
That's like the classic Paranormal Activity move.
Mm-hmm.
How they get you, you know.
And Area 2 in that game for the rest of the game not being that scary, and I would say that I kind of felt a little bit let down playing it, because I had the expectation, especially coming off of 7, that was a lot more horror versus action. I expected 8 with the same protagonist to be a little bit scarier, and it really like. It really wasn't. Most of it was kind of like really just cheesy and more funny than anything. I didn't find a lot of the enemies very like compelling or believable. But section 2, they take your guns away and put you in this house. And it is a real throwback to 7. And it is absolutely grotesque. There's like the scariest type of monster. I won't spoil what it is, but it is the scariest type of monster, and it chases you around, and you have to hide under the bed, and it is an absolute, like, the game hasn't prepared me for this moment. So props to 8 for maybe having the scariest section, but I think I
hope it wasn't Thomas the Tank Engine.
Dude. No, that's the Skyrim special. But yeah, I think overall, I hope selfishly that Resident Evil goes with more of its 7 roots, but I think people tend to like the action.
I think they alternate it
games
pretty well, you know. I think they've got a pretty good 50-50 split among like their whole library, really. So I'm sure that we'll get more of both, which is, I mean, it's probably good to have the variety. But how have we got this far without talking about Bloodborne yet, Kate? You got to bring that up. I remember specifically, I mean, we've talked about Bloodborne so much on the show. I think I was trying to think back of like what to me was the creepiest part of the whole game, or like the most off-putting thing. And I think it was the first time I entered Hemwick and had there all the witches are like dancing around and being all crazy, and you can kind of hear them talking from the distance
and cackling.
They're dancing around. For some reason, that one sticks out to me as like that was the pinnacle of creepiness in Bloodborne. But there were so many times like entering Bergenworth for the first time and seeing that kind of whole display was amazing. And yeah, just some of the jump scares, like enemies coming around the corners, obviously are big
Yeah,
moments. But yeah, Bergenworth to
some
me
werewolves jumping down
is
at you.
oh man, or the one in Lower Yarnum or whatever where they break through that glass window in that
Mm-hmm.
long hallway. That scared the shit out of me the first
That
time I
scared the
played that.
shit
Oh
out
my
of me.
god.
Not only did that scare the shit out of me the first time, but there's like another one in the area that does like the same thing to you. And so like it gets you like twofold depending on which way you go through the level.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Bloodborne is a scary game. There's no joke about that. I think the one thing that keeps Bloodborne from feeling really scary to me is the amount of adrenaline that you have coursing through your brain or through your veins, and like how
Yeah.
much your
You don't
heart
have
is
time to be
pumping.
scared.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't have time to consider how scared you are in that game. It is an absolute like it goes at like triple the speed that your life normally goes at when you're playing Bloodborne.
I think the I think the only thing that holds it back from being like legitimately my most frightening game experience is that because I'm not overly good at it, I died enough times to where I would experience the same areas over and over. And so the more familiar I became with it, the less I was kind of intimidated by the atmosphere. But I know like
Yeah.
getting to each area and seeing everything for the first time, if I was going to be someone who was, not having too much trouble, not dying really, and just kind of speeding through, I think that would have made it even scarier.
And the sound design in that game is phenomenal. And I think that's kind of like what horror games have as their strongest asset is how the sound plays at you. And Bloodborne definitely doesn't shy away from that. But I think you hit the nail on the head with dying is that there's that tension that you have of like staying alive in a horror game. And once you've died a couple times, especially if it's like a monster that is concurrent throughout the entire game, and you see that animation of when they grab you and they probably do some horrific things to your body and like you die in the most gruesome way, but once you've seen that 2 or 3 times, it's not as scary anymore. And I think that's like kind of a subtle but key detail for Bloodborne is that you die a lot, and you
Hmm.
don't typically tend to die in like, I mean it's horrible, but it's not like the same kind of like gruesome cutscene that a horror game would play at you.
Right. Or
It's
it's not
just,
like watching like a Mortal Kombat finisher and they break
yeah.
your bones the same way every time. Yeah.
Exactly. It's more of just like, okay, you died, try again. And so I think because you're constantly like you accept your death a lot quicker in that game, and you're kind of like assuming that you will die a lot, that it's not quite as tense to try to stay alive. It's more of like, strategizing and how am I going to go around this? Whereas when you're in a horror game, especially if you've been going a long time, you're not really sure how it's checkpointing. It's like, I can't die. I can't die. Like, I've made it this far. Like, where is he? I can't die. And like with Bloodborne too, it's like you're strong too. Like
Hmm.
you know how to carry yourself. Like you got a lot of options. You can shoot it. You can shoot your gun right in a monster's face, and that is your best bet. You got
Canon.
a can. Yeah, you can have the cannon. There's a flamethrower in that game too. Like, how safe is that? But yeah, I think that
We would just say Bloodborne's easily the scariest of all the Souls. Like I know the other ones are creepy here and there, but I
yeah.
don't think they're quite as horror entrenched
I
as
think
Bloodborne
I
is.
think definitely. I think a lot of some of the other games have like the gothic sections, and there's definitely been some scary moments in the other games for sure. But Bloodborne is definitely more putting its toe over the line in terms
Hmm.
of genre, which I'm a big sucker for the Lovecraft stuff, so I'm 100% on board with Bloodborne's world. But definitely, there's even a place, actually, it's funny, when I was playing Demon Souls, because going back to that after playing all of the other games, you can really see the roots for everything. And there's one section in Demon Souls where it's just like, oh boy, like you thought it was like blood and fetuses and like grotesque, like over the top, like disgusting abomination monsters in Bloodborne. There's a section in Demon Souls where you're like, that's where that came from. Like, yep, I've
I
stepped
think I
into
know
the
the section you're
Bloodborne
talking
level.
about actually. It's like everything's dripping with blood on the floor,
Everything's
right? And
yeah,
and there's like cages. Yeah, I have seen
yeah,
that.
you descend into
That's
this
weird. That's like
thing,
the
and there's these
reference.
like little worm, like fetus
Hmm.
little
It's a
worm
boss battle, right?
monsters.
Down there.
Um,
There is a boss battle, I think.
There is. I'm trying to think who
Maybe
the
not.
boss is
Not
of that
important.
one, but yeah, it is. It just yeah, you kind of like are descending, and it just gets grosser and grosser as you go, and these like horrible like spidery kind of monsters, and it was just like it's so Bloodborne. I loved it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Another one I wanted to bring up too,
mhm.
Until Dawn, and that
Yeah,
that kind of Man of Medan series, more so Until Dawn, just because I think it's a better game. But I think the choose your own adventure is a really good style for a horror kind of game, because I think a lot of times when you're watching horror movies, it's easy to sit there and criticize like, "Oh, you idiot! Why did you go through the door? You know, you shouldn't have went in." But then in this game, you have to make decisions, and a lot of your decisions end up being also really stupid. And sometimes they work out, and sometimes they don't. But being in control of like that choose your own adventure style for horror, I think is just such a perfect match. And I really wish that there would be more attempts. I mean, I guess Man of Medan's doing it, and you know, to varying levels of success. But it's just such a great game, like Until Dawn. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that is like the most underrated subgenre of horror games because, and I know a lot of
I can't
people
really think of too many other like examples
there
of it,
haven't been
really.
too many, and I there's like visual novels, which I guess is kind of like adjacent. But I think the
Hmm.
difference with something like Until Dawn is that you don't have the time. Like there is always that tension of like when you make a decision, you have 2 seconds to make it, and that's it. And like you're doing quick time events, and there are consequences. Like in a regular horror game, if you get caught and you die, it sucks and it's spooky. But you go back to your last checkpoint and you try again until you get through the section. But in something like Until Dawn, there's an immediate consequence. You don't get to go back. Like maybe a character dies that could have survived
Hmm.
otherwise.
Or
Or,
you got to take some weird path, and someone else gets trapped somewhere else, and
yeah,
you lose them instead, or it could be anything.
exactly. Everything just kind of compiles. And I think having that like immediate like consequence is not only good for keeping the pacing and the tone consistent because as we said, like once you start dying and you start repeating a section, it's not scary anymore. It's just becomes kind of tedious because the gameplay in horror games isn't usually the most fun type of game to play, right? You're playing for the atmosphere and the story and to be spooked out. So when you get stuck in a horror game or have to repeat it multiple times, it really starts to be a drag. So I think games like Until Dawn have a really big advantage over that because they don't stop for anything. They just keep going and like you got to live with what happened. So I think that's really good. And I think visual novels are good for that sort of aspect as well.
Hmm.
The only
Hmm.
thing that they can suffer from is that they can be kind of slow and the tension gets removed when you're just kind of reading text as opposed to like actively experiencing something. But
Yeah. Have you played many horror visual novels? Or,
the one
I mean, I
I've
can't really think of an
the
example.
one I've played that really stands out, and it is kind of like a joke game in a way, but I think it was really successful was Doki Doki Literature Club,
I want to play that.
and
I've heard so many good things.
it's really good, and I just respect this game a hell of a lot for like what it was because I don't think, as far as I'm aware, I don't think they really necessarily branded it originally as like a horror game because it starts out as like a dating sim visual
Yeah.
novel and it is like full on kind of like like the very like stereotypical anime dating sim like really kind of like you don't really want someone to walk in on you while you're playing this kind of
Yeah,
thing.
no. You'd have a lot of explaining
um
to do if you did.
yeah, exactly. And so it just kind of starts to slowly introduce these horror elements. Like something weird will happen. You're like, oh, that was strange, but okay, I don't have to think too much about it. And you continue on, and I don't know which of these four girls will all date, and it just sort of these like cracks start to show. And then by the end of it, like it does some pretty unique stuff with like going into your save files and changing stuff and like you actually
Mm.
have to like access stuff on your like go into like where your saves are to access stuff and like kind of breaks the fourth wall a bit like that. And yeah, like when it kind of like gets that corrupt vibe and you're sort of like trapped, and so there's an element of you lose a bit of anonymity. Is that how you say that word? I always have trouble with that word.
Anonymity, I think.
Anonymity, yeah. So you lose that a bit, and that, I think that's unsettling because it sort of like tries to blur that barrier of like, are you playing a game or like are
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
directly involved? And so I think it was good. It
Stuff like that
definitely,
is super cool.
yeah, and I think it definitely felt unsettling. I don't think I ever felt like super scared playing it, but I really like the kind of like unsettling atmosphere. Um,
It's funny you mentioned that, like that type of horror, because one of the best examples I can think of that, and it just like popped into my head now, was actually playing Super Hot. And I don't know if you've played that before, but
mhm.
that game has kind of an ending where it breaks the fourth wall, and it turns out like it shows you like at a computer and you have to kill yourself, right? And
Oh,
it
that
like
is so
spoilers for that game,
cool.
I guess, but it's old enough. I figured it was safe, but
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty interesting, like the way that it breaks that. It's similar to like Metal Gear, right? They started that with like remove your memory card or whatever, or play
Yeah,
with the second
yeah,
controller.
yep.
Like very cool way to relate it back to being like, oh, is your house haunted? I don't know. Like,
Yeah, that is super cool. And I think if anyone's interested in that kind of thing without spoiling anything, play Undertale. I know Undertale has a bit of
hmm hmm
reputation and some people are a little bit turned off by the community, but genuinely, that game is an absolute work of art. And I think it is the king of incorporating that kind of element of like you as a player is not necessarily a character within the game, but like you are your own entity that is not necessarily tied to the main character that you're playing as. You are recognized as a player, and the game really kind of fucks with your head a lot in that way. And depending on what you do and how you approach the game kind of responds to you differently. And oh, I don't know if I would necessarily call that game scary, but I think it's
I
definitely
don't think
like
it's scary.
I don't think it's scary because like the game's very humorous and it does a lot of like, you know, it's kind of silly and the atmosphere is really lighthearted. But it definitely has some serious moments that really give you that like bone chilling kind of feeling. And so it's not horror, but it might be unsettling, like kind of horror adjacent at times.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's funny. I was actually just playing Undertale yesterday a little bit. We were starting a genocide run,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely got some. It's just that little bit of unsettling. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Not horror, but unsettling. I don't know. Did you have many more games you wanted to bring up here? I'm kind of my list is running a bit thin.
I have a story to tell you about what I think is the scariest moment I've ever had in a game.
Okay. Well, I tell you what. I've got a list of just a couple games I want to mention that are
Okay.
kind of like horror adjacent, and then maybe we'll end on your story.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. So I just wanted to bring up really quick, not really horror games, but first of all, shout out The Last of Us. You know,
Yep.
zombies is kind of horror adjacent.
Yep.
We've talked enough about that. Don't need to mention it too much more, but it's just such an amazing franchise. So there you go. Another two I wanted to mention, Costume Quest, just because it is the Halloween game. It's about trick or treating. Your costumes, whatever costume you're wearing, becomes the character you are in when you get
That
into the
game
battle.
is
So if you're
adorable.
yeah.
Yeah.
If your trick or treaters wearing a robot costume, you turn into like a giant Megazord for the fight. So that's pretty fun. And the other one is Luigi's Mansion. I recently played Luigi's Mansion on the 3DS version when I was on a flight a couple of years ago after never really having played the first one on GameCube, and it was great. I liked it. The Haunted Mansion is totally like a Disney kind of vibe, you know, like a Nintendo take on what a horror game would be. But it's got some, I guess, like mildly scary jump scares in there, and Luigi himself is just so likable as that horrified protagonist.
Just
So
shaking the whole time.
I think it just works really well. And yeah, he's like sweating and crying and having a terrible time, but he saves the day in the end. And so everything's good. And so yeah, I just wanted to shout those out as Halloween adjacent
Yeah.
games there.
And I love that as a second separate genre, the kind of like cute spooky atmosphere kind of stuff, like something like Costume Quest, Luigi's Mansion. Like I like that Halloween has like there's the scary Halloween and then there's like the really cute spooky vibes Halloween, and I love that that's like its own thing now.
Yeah.
Um,
Even like Animal Crossing with like the decorations you can put up and stuff in there.
yeah, it's like its own like aesthetic now, and that's kind of cool. Um, But yeah, I think I'll leave you then because yeah, I was thinking about it and I want to give just one quick honorable run-up mention to the end of the first Uncharted game. Really, really terrifying.
Oh, right, yeah.
You're like down in the
Surprisingly,
in
that's
that
really out
vault.
of nowhere.
Yeah, you're down in that like Nazi bunker or wherever, and like you find all those like horrifying like golem creatures that were corrupted by the treasure, and like I remember
That
like
really hit me off guard when that
yeah,
happened.
I remember being terrified. I remember like sitting in like my parents' basement playing that game when I was like 16 and just being like terrified, like so scared. And I remember like I died a couple times and was having trouble beating it. And then like my mom called me. She's like, "Oh, like dinner," and I like had to like pause. And I was like, "I don't want to have to come back to this. Like, I don't want to have to go back down there after dinner." And of course, I beat it and it was fine. But I think like you don't expect Uncharted to be a scary game because, like, you know, Nate's just quipping the whole time and it's, you know, it's light, pleasant in these beautiful jungles. But like, holy shit, was that terrifying?
You think Nate's gonna need some counseling sessions or something after that?
You'd really
I would
think
imagine,
so.
and also like murdering 50,000 people a game, but we'll
Well,
maybe leave that one.
we'll gloss over that. But I want to give for my favorite implementation of horror in a video game, I want to give the award to Hollow Knight, actually. And so I don't
That game
know.
is a bit creepy.
I don't know if you ever made it to Deep Nest, but
I don't think so.
that area fucks with you. That area takes you for an absolute ride, and it knows exactly what it's doing. So I think if you haven't played Hollow Knight, I think this is a game that really is best experienced going in blind, and because the game's all about exploration. And so I would say please stop listening, play Hollow Knight. It is amazing. It's like $10. It's like one of the most polished games I've ever played. There's no excuse not to play Hollow Knight.
It's on everything too.
It's on everything. Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. One day Silk Song will be out, and so you don't want to have missed Hollow Knight.
One day Silk Song will be out.
words that will not age well. But anyway, so by the time you can make it to Deep Nest, you've had to explore a bit of the rest of the game. You've gotten familiar at this point. Like, you've got your controls down. You know how enemies work. When you walk onto a map, all the enemies that are there are already on the map, and you fight your way through. And the game's atmospheric at times, and there's a place that's a little bit somber, and there's places that are a little bit more hopeful. But it's not a scary game by any means. And you get to Deep Nest, and now Deep Nest is one of the games that's like intended to be done a little bit later on, just in terms of like how much health the enemies have, and kind of some of the platforming sections. So you can make it to Deep Nest a lot earlier than you're kind of like intended to. And that's what happened to me. And when you go to Deep Nest for the first time, you fall into it. So you can't really get out of it easily. There's a way you can fall in, and then you're just sort of trapped there, and you have to find your way out.
And you went there unintentionally.
And
then,
I
right?
went there
like not knowing you weren't supposed to go there yet.
Unintentionally, like probably a little bit. Like I could have maybe had a couple upgrades for damage or something that would have helped me out. And so I kind of fell in. I wasn't expecting a spooky horror thing, and the whole atmosphere, like the music changes. It's scary. There's all the sounds of like spiders scuffling in the background, but you can't see them. It's dark, so you can't see as much on the map as you normally would. Like when you look down, you can't see far enough down to know where you're going to jump into. So it's like blind leaps of faith. And it just changes all of the rules on you. And you're not prepared because you think you understand what the game is like. And it throws you for this incredible curveball. So when you're in Deep Nest, enemies just spawn out of, like, they materialize on you. And so you're taught that, like, when you walk in a room, you see the enemies, those, cute little bugs, and you fight them. But in Deep Nest, these horrific spider things just spawn in on you when you're walking around. And
that's not cool.
There's no warning. There's not cool. And then, you're also taught in Hollow Knight, you fight, and then you have time afterwards in a fight. You're safe. You have a moment you can heal or, check your map, whatever you need to do. But in Deep Nest, not only are there weird spawning monsters, sometimes monster corpses reanimate and come at you. And so you think you've killed them. Okay, it's time to heal after the fight. They reanimate and fight you, but they don't always reanimate. So then sometimes you're standing beside the corpse like, okay, I'm waiting. I know you're going to respawn. And then they don't. You're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm safe. And you turn around and then maybe they do. Like, they just you can't use the game's internal consistency. And so you're constantly like on guard because you no longer know the rules. You're no longer playing the same game that you were playing before. And, there's tons of like fake floors that you fall through and traps everywhere. And it's just genuinely like, it feels so oppressive and you just want to get out of there, but you don't know how. And it kind of culminates
It sounds like a nightmare.
Oh, it's so good, though. I loved every second of it. I was like, this fucking game, you're cursing at it, you're swearing, you're so upset about the injustice of it all. And it's one of my favorite gaming experiences I've ever had because it's just done it's so well crafted. And there's this one room that really is the pinnacle of Deep Nest. And I will say, too, as well, like, once you know what Deep Nest does, it's not hard. Like, those enemies are easy to deal with once you know what they're going to do, but it's just you're so caught off guard is the problem that it takes you a little bit of time to kind of figure out. Like on a second playthrough, deepness is no big deal, but on your first playthrough, like it destroys your life. But it kind of culminates in this room, which I think is the funniest thing in the whole world. But you go in this room, and throughout Hollow Knight, you're finding these little grubs, and they're these little like cute little worm things in these jars. And you break the jar and you save them, and you can go to this room and you see how many you've saved, and it's kind of like a little like side quest, I guess, you're on to save all these little grubs, and they're so cute.
Nice little collection.
Exactly, and they're so cute. You get rewards for like, you know, benchmarks of how many you've saved. So you go to this room in deepness and there's a grub and you're like, oh good, like how cute, I'll go save the grub. And you go and you hit it, and then it turns into a mimic. And you've never seen a mimic before in Hollow Knight. You're like, oh, fucking course, deepness has mimics. Awesome. So you fight him, and then you keep going a little bit more in the room. And of course, it's dark. You can only see so far ahead of you. So you go a little more and you find another grub. And you're like, okay, this is the actual grub. This is my reward for fighting that stupid mimic grub.
No,
how cruel. So you hit it, and it's another goddamn mimic. And you're like, wow, this piece of shit game. You beat him, and you continue on. And there's another mimic, and then you're like, okay, I don't trust this, because now I'm like, I've seen a pattern. I'm not going to be the fool 3 times in a row. You're not going to do me dirty like this, Hollow Knight. So you walk past it, and then you find pretty much right after there's a 4th one. So there's 4 total. And you're like, okay, I see what you're playing at. You thought I just hit this 3rd one again thinking it's my reward, but secretly it's this 4th one that was a little bit further along. So I'm just going to hit this 4th one and leave the dumb 3rd one. I've figured you out. I've outsmarted you, Hollow Knight. No, it's the 3rd one that's the real one. So you hit 4. It's another goddamn mimic. 3 is the good one. And it's just like, I can only imagine what psychopaths came up with this room. And that to me is like, if I could work on video games, if I ever got into the industry and I was, you know, like in some kind of like lead design role, that's the kind of dumb room shit that I would make up, because I don't know what it is. I must have some kind of like sick tendency in games.
Cruel.
But
you're
like,
cruel.
I just love it. Like, Sen's Fortress is probably one of my favorite areas in Dark Souls. Like, I just love these stupid, horrible trap things where it's like, come on, like, how mean could you possibly get? And I just think it's so funny. And yeah, Hollow Knight is the absolute culmination of that dumbass mimic room. There's nothing else in the game like it, but stupid deepness just has to get you one more time to kick you while you're down.
I love it. That's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any fun examples, though, of fun moments in horror games or games you find that had scary moments, I'd love to hear about it. So please write into our email at circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com. Or you can get in touch with us on Twitter as well, at CNSPod. All the links are down in the description and the show notes and whatever, too. But we'd love to hear what your favorite horror games are. I'm sure there's so many we didn't get to talk about, obviously. There's probably people that have played all the hit ones on Steam that we've just never even heard of. So, yeah, let us know. It's interesting. And we might check them out, too, especially Kate, with your little group you like to play the horror games, so you never know. But just because it is the end of the show, we do have a listener mail question to get through first. And Kate, what's our question for the day?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a fun question today. Just a cute little one here, and it is, hang on, sorry, 1 second. It's, what's your worst experience playing a video game? That comes from Mattias. So this is kind of like, we can kind of take this in a few ways. I think we both went down a cute little route, because, you know, like there's definitely been some stinkers we've played, and there's definitely some games where, like,
we can go
this
get
is garbage,
licensed game on Game Boy Advance. Like, we've had a few of those in the day.
I had a Shrek game, and oh my god, do you remember how bad that Shrek game was?
It was terrible. It was legitimately one of the worst things I've ever played in my life. Really terrible. I don't know. I don't want to talk about that too much, though. I mean, I have a pretty good one I thought of the other day. I mean, I bagged on LA Noire that other episode, so I didn't want to go down that route again. But I was just thinking about experiences I had recently, and the one that came to me was something I was kind of excited for. Was I had a group of me and a couple friends, or we had a group of 4 of us, and we wanted to play Payday, because we thought, hey, the heists are pretty cool. You know, a lot of people like those in GTA, but we don't have GTA, so let's just pick this up on a sale, and it would be cool to, like, you know, oh, I'm a getaway driver, I'm gonna go rob this bank, and you know, I'll take down the security and I'll have your role and pull off the heist. Like, that sounds very interesting. And the game itself isn't bad, but we just had such a buggy experience with it. And I mean, for one thing, I guess it doesn't really, or we didn't feel it onboarded you very well. Like the game seems to have a lot of mechanics that it just doesn't really teach you. And even though we were trying to be as stealthy as we possibly could, we always would get seen and it would just become like a big gunfight. And that's really not what the game's about. But there was this one time when, like, for example, I threw a grenade by accident one time trying to be stealthy, and it just completely ruined the whole mission. But there was this one time where we actually were fairly stealthy, and we'd pulled off, the mission, and we did have these bags of money we were carrying out of the bank. I think we did get seen at the end, but the thing happened where we actually managed to do it with, like, no glitches happening. Everyone could connect to the game. It was going well, but then at the end, you had to run back to the getaway car, and there's this zone you stand in to complete the mission where it's like, okay, now you've loaded it in, you can leave. And we just had this ridiculous glitch that happened again where one of us just couldn't, it didn't work. It didn't register that they were standing in the box. So we just couldn't even complete it after the one successful attempt we'd had. And it just became this, like, the anticipation of how fun it would be to work as a squad like that kind of just really got melted down and like was ruined just by kind of an unfortunate buggy experience. And so I think that's definitely probably the worst experience I've had in a while, just in terms of, like, the game really didn't have a fair chance because it didn't work properly.
And that's a shame, and that's just something you can't get past. Like, I think about it too, like Hunter's Arena is another one of those games where, like, I was actually looking forward to playing that when we had it free for PS Plus.
Yeah, it seemed cool.
I think that was back in, like, it was a few months ago now.
It's like last month, right?
Yeah, and I was kind of looking forward to it, and it was just so buggy. It just ran so horrible and, like, laggy, and I just, like, people would just be teleporting around, and there was just no semblance of it being like a game I could actually play. And so that was disappointing.
Well, wasn't that the one that they didn't have the server anywhere near our region or something like that?
Yeah, I think that might have been it. So I mean, that didn't help, and maybe it's better now, but it was just such a letdown because I'd actually been kind of looking forward to it. I think, like, the other shout I can give is, like, Tony Hawk's the worst game ever made, so we know that.
Goddamn Tony Hawk!
Yeah,
Leave the guy alone.
Sorry,
leave him alone.
I'm sorry, Tony. But I think with what I've played recently, and I think, like, maybe it's just part of having limited time to play games now, is I typically tend to have a pretty good idea if I'm gonna like something before I play it. Like, like, there's only so many options, so many games you can realistically have time for now. So I kind of save it for the heavy hitters. I would say the game I've played that I've been the most bored playing lately, which is never a good thing. So I've played some bad games, but had fun with them, especially when you're playing with friends and you're just kind of making fun of it. And, like, I remember last New Year's we played, what was it even called? It was like Loot Quest or something. It was like this.
I remember you talking about that on the show.
It was so funny. Bad. It was the worst game. Like, it was worse than Tony Hawk. I will go on the record saying that was a terrible game. But we were just like, we'd had a couple drinks or whatever, and we were just, like, having so much fun. We must have played for, like, at least 4 hours, and it was just, I think, like, you can have a good time with anything, Sometimes you watch a bad movie for the sake of watching a bad movie just to have a laugh. But when I played Wreckfest back in, I think it was May for PS Plus, I've never been so genuinely just bored playing a game, and I think that's the worst that you can really get, because at least if a game's bad, maybe it has something interesting that it tried and just didn't succeed. Like, if it's buggy or something, you just stop playing. If you have some kind of takeaway normally when you play a game, and this is your spare time, this is what you're doing for entertainment, you want to have something tangible. But with Wreckfest, I felt nothing. I felt dead inside when I played that game. And so yeah, it's probably been one of my worst gaming experiences of the year, just because it was just sad. It was just an hour I'll never get back of my life.
Well, Kate, in the spirit of Halloween, that sounds truly horrifying, and I am sorry. You had to experience that for the greater good of this podcast.
And I'll do it again.
But yeah, guys, like I said before, get in touch with us if you have some bad gaming experiences to share as well. Hopefully you guys don't have too many experiences like the one Kate had with Wreckfest, but if you did, let us know. And look out for us next Monday with the next episode of the Circles and Squares News Report, which will be exactly a week from when you listen to this. So until then, we'll see you next time.